The clock on the ferry building stopped at exactly 5:12 a.m. In the 60 seconds that followed, the earth beneath San Francisco didn't just shake, it liquefied. But it wasn't the shaking that changed history. It was what happened 24 hours later when the dust began to settle over the smoldering ruins of Market Street. A cleanup crew, tasked with clearing a path through the charred timber and twisted steel of a collapsed department store, swung a heavy pickaxe into the buckled pavement. They expected to hit solid resistance of California bedrock or the packed sand of the peninsula. Instead, the ground vanished. The pickaxe didn't thud. It whistled into a void. As the workers peered into the jagged hole, the smoke from the still-burning city swirling above them, they didn't see a broken sewer line or a shallow basement. They saw a vaulted ceiling of perfect, glowing red brick descending into a darkness that felt far older than the city that had just been destroyed. This was the moment the official narrative of San Francisco began to crack. When historians describe 1906, they focus on the tragedy above the surface. They talk about the 3,000 dead, the 400 blocks in ruins, and the heroic effort to rebuild a modern metropolis in less than a decade. It is a story of American resilience, but buried within the municipal footnotes and the private journals of the men who actually moved the dirt, there is a different story, a story of a city that wasn't just rebuilt, but one that was uncovered. As the reconstruction teams moved past the first recognizable layers of the ruined city, their expectations were simple. They believed they would find what any young 50-year-old city would have underground: primitive wooden drainage pipes, shallow foundations from the gold rush era, and perhaps a few forgotten basements. But as the excavations deepened in the winter of 1906, those assumptions collapsed. Instead of a chaotic mess of earthquake damage, the teams uncovered a stack of infrastructure layers that defied the laws of urban evolution. The first anomaly was the alignment. This is the detail that keeps modern architects awake at night. When you look at the survey maps produced during the cleanup, you see a terrifyingly perfect symmetry. The Victorian streets of 1900 followed a specific grid. When the workers dug 20 feet down, they found a secondary grid of tunnels. When they dug 40 feet down, they found a third. In a normal city, infrastructure evolves. It curves around obstacles. It shifts as new planners take over. But beneath San Francisco, every layer, regardless of its supposed age, followed the exact same geometric trajectory. The tunnels from the ancient layer ran directly beneath the streets of the modern layer with a mathematical precision that suggests they were all part of the same master plan. It was as if every group that had ever built on this peninsula wasn't building a new city, but merely following the ghosts of a plan that had been laid down long before the first Spanish explorers stepped foot on the coast. One engineer, whose notes were later recovered from a private estate in North Beach, described a section of tunnel near what is now the financial district. He noted that the brickwork wasn't just good, it was impossible. The bricks were smaller than the standard issue used in the 1880s. They were fired to a density that made them ring like metal when struck. But the joints, the mortar between the bricks, were what truly unnerved the crew. They were so thin, so perfectly uniform that a razor blade couldn't be inserted between the courses. In 1906, San Francisco was a city of wood and rough stone. The technology required to lay thousands of miles of precision curved brickwork at that depth with that level of finish simply didn't exist in the California of the 1850s. And yet, there it was, miles of it, choked with mud. This brings us to the element that gave this mystery its name, the sediment. As the crews opened these vaulted chambers, they didn't find them empty. They found them packed from floor to ceiling with a specific type of hardened blue-gray silt. It wasn't the loose rubble you'd expect from an earthquake. It was a dense hydraulic sediment, the kind of mud that only settles after a massive, sustained inundation of water. The official reconstruction reports from 1907 briefly mention waterlogged debris in the lower levels. They dismissed it as broken water mains from the earthquake, but the math doesn't work. To fill a tunnel network of this scale, at this depth, with that level of compression would require millions of gallons of pressurized silt. San Francisco's water mains in 1906 couldn't have filled a fraction of these voids, and the earthquake happened during A dry spell. Where did the mud come from? The workers had to use high-pressure hoses and steam shovels just to clear a few yards of these passages. And as they cleared the silt, the mudflood theory began to take shape in the whispers of the lunchrooms. They weren't digging out earthquake damage. They were excavating a city that had been drowned and buried long before the gold rush. The scale was the next thing that broke the surveyors' spirits. San Francisco in the late 19th century was a booming town, yes, but it was still a town of horses and cable cars. Why then did the cleanup crews find arterial tunnels wide enough to drive 2 carriages through side by side, 30 feet below the surface of Nob Hill? Why were their drainage systems carved directly into the bedrock that were capable of handling the runoff of a city 5 times the size of San Francisco? It was infrastructure built for a giant that hadn't arrived. Yet, by mid-1906, the atmosphere at the excavation sites changed. The initial wonder of the discovery was replaced by a strange bureaucratic urgency. Men in suits who didn't look like engineers or city planners began appearing at the dig sites. They didn't take measurements of the brickwork. They took the notebooks. The survey photographs from this period are some of the only evidence we have left. If you look closely at the grainy, sepia-toned images, you see the contradictions. You see workers standing in a trench. Above them, you see the shattered remains of a 19th century Victorian building, rough-hewn timber, chaotic piles of rubble. But beneath their feet, you see the top of a perfectly smooth, arched corridor. The contrast is jarring. The older construction looks more advanced than the newer construction. The deeper they went, the more the architecture shifted from the primitive to the sophisticated. It was an inverted timeline. In the financial district near the old shoreline, a team uncovered what they called the Great Gallery. It was a vaulted space that stretched for blocks, lined with a glazed white brick that seemed to repel the dampness of the bay. The ceiling was a series of perfect interlocking domes. There were no marks of chisels on the stone, no signs of the rough, hurried labor that defined the 1849 era. It looked like it had been poured into place or perhaps grown. One foreman reportedly asked a city official where the blueprints for the gallery were kept. The official's response was recorded in a letter to the foreman's wife. There are no blueprints for what was already here. We are just cleaning the pipes. But they weren't just cleaning. They were discovering that the very foundation of the city was a lie. The deeper the excavations went, the more the alignment mystery deepened. In the North Beach area, crews found that the subterranean tunnels didn't just align with the streets, they aligned with the stars. Specifically, certain primary corridors were oriented to the exact points of the solstices, a feat of archaeoastronomy that you find in the Great Pyramid or Stonehenge, but certainly not in a 19th century utility project. Why would a sewer line need to align with the rising sun of the summer solstice? As the summer of 1906 turned to autumn, the open loops of the mystery were everywhere. The brickwork that rang like metal, the mud that shouldn't have been there, the tunnels built for a population that didn't exist, and the silence, the growing, heavy silence of the municipal government. The public was told that the reconstruction was going well. The newspapers were filled with drawings of the new San Francisco, but underground, the old San Francisco was being hastily dealt with. The instructions changed. Engineers were told to stop clearing the tunnels and start filling them. Huge quantities of earthquake rubble, the pulverized remains of the city above, were being shoveled back down into the very tunnels that had just been uncovered. It was the perfect cover. You had a city's worth of debris to get rid of, and you had a subterranean world that you didn't want anyone to see. You could solve 2 problems at once. The Great Sealing had begun, but before the last of the deep galleries were lost to the darkness, one final discovery was made near the ruins of the Palace Hotel. A team of excavators working a night shift under the hiss of gas lamps broke through a false wall in a sub-basement. Behind it wasn't mud or silt. It was a dry, pristine chamber. And on the floor of that chamber, they found the impossible rails. They were metal tracks, fused directly into a floor of polished stone. They looked like transit rails, but they were too narrow for a standard train and too wide for a mining cart. They glowed with a dull, silver-gray luster that didn't look like iron or steel. They didn't show a speck of rust despite being buried in the damp earth of a peninsula for an unknown number of decades. The foreman of that crew reportedly refused to fill the room. He called for a specialist from the university. Instead, he got a squad of soldiers from the Presidio. The site was cordoned off. The workers were reassigned. By morning, 20 tons of concrete had been poured into the void. The official report for that day simply reads, "Structural instability addressed, area secured." As we move into the next phase of this investigation, we have to ask, what were they so afraid of? If these were just old utility tunnels, why the military intervention? Why the haste to bury the most advanced architecture first? The 1906 earthquake was a tragedy, yes, but for those who controlled the narrative, it was an opportunity. It was the chance to bury a history that didn't fit the books. It was the chance to take a city that had been inherited and claim it had been built. And as the new San Francisco began to rise from the ashes, the people walking the streets above had no idea that just 40 feet below their boots, a silent, sophisticated world was being entombed in mud and secrets. But secrets have a way of breathing, and the tunnels weren't all filled. Some were kept, some were repurposed, and some are still waiting to be found. The concrete poured into the sub-basement of the Palace Hotel wasn't just filling a hole, it was sealing a witness. In the weeks that followed that discovery near the impossible rails, a new protocol took hold across the ruined city. The open, curious exploration of the first few months was replaced by a rigid, almost military-grade compartmentalization. If you were a worker on a cleanup crew in early 1907, you no longer had a panoramic view of the excavation. You were assigned to a specific quadrant. You were forbidden from discussing your findings with crews from other sectors. And, most importantly, you were introduced to the vertical mystery, the circular shafts. As the heavy machinery moved into the North Beach and Telegraph Hill areas, surveyors began documenting structures that made no sense within the context of a 19th century urban planning. They were giant, perfectly cylindrical access shafts. The official municipal records, produced years later, would label these as abandoned artesian wells or natural sinkholes caused by the tectonic shift. But the photographs tell a different story. These weren't rough, hand-dug pits. They were engineered vertical passages, some 30 feet in diameter, lined with the same precision-cut glazed brick found in the deep galleries. What made them truly unsettling was their interior geometry. The shafts didn't just drop straight down. Many featured a slight mathematical taper, narrowing gradually as they descended, almost like the barrel of a massive telescope or a ventilation system for a subterranean factory. In some of these shafts, workers reported seeing slots or grooves cut into the brickwork that ran the entire vertical length of the structure. These weren't ladder rungs. They were mechanical tracks, as if some massive elevator or heavy machinery was meant to slide up and down through the earth with zero friction. One report buried in the 1908 Bureau of Engineering files mentions a shaft found near the base of Rincon Hill. The engineers dropped a weighted line down. It went 60 feet before it hit a metallic obstruction. When they tried to drill through the obstruction to see what lay beneath the drill, bits, hardened steel used for mining, shattered. Within 48 hours, that specific shaft wasn't just capped. It was filled with liquefied debris and paved over. It's still there today, somewhere beneath the foundation of a modern skyscraper, a vertical anomaly that remains unexplored. This leads us to the question of the Great Sealing. By the spring of 1907, the reconstruction of San Francisco was in full swing. But there was a strange paradox in how the city was being rebuilt. While the newspapers bragged about the city of the future, the city's actual engineers seemed obsessed with the past. If you look at the construction permits from 1907, you see an unusual number of foundation reinforcements for buildings that weren't particularly heavy. Why would a 3-story Victorian office building need a foundation designed to support a 20-story fortress? The answer lies in what was beneath the soil. The engineers weren't building foundations, they were building lids. The reconstruction teams were using the existing ancient tunnel network as a sort of ready-made basement system, but they weren't using it for storage or transit. They were using it to hide the rubble. San Francisco had a problem: millions of tons of earthquake debris. Transporting it out of the city by sea was expensive and slow. The Yernimitzer solution was elegant and devastating. They used the high-pressure water monitors, the same ones used in hydraulic gold mining, to wash the ruins of the old city into the tunnels of the even older city. This explains the hardened mud that modern researchers find today. It wasn't just a natural flood, it was an artificial one. It was a deliberate act of historical erasure. By liquefying the earthquake rubble and pumping it into the deep galleries, the city planners of 1907 achieved two goals. They cleaned the streets and they entombed the evidence of the sophisticated infrastructure they didn't want to explain. But why the secrecy? Why not just claim the tunnels were built by early Spanish settlers or the first gold rush pioneers? Because the architecture itself made that lie impossible. In the archives of the California Historical Society, there are a handful of unclassified photos showing the tunnel junctions near the financial district. In these images, you can see the impossible timeline in plain sight. You see the rough, hand-poured concrete of the 1907 reconstruction, full of air bubbles, uneven and crude, and directly beneath it, supporting the weight of the modern work, you see the ancient brickwork, smooth, flawless, and mathematically perfect. It becomes clear that the 1907 builders were inheritors, not creators. They were like children building a treehouse in the canopy of a massive ancient oak tree. They didn't understand the tree, they just knew it was strong enough to hold their weight. One of the most damning pieces of evidence for this inheritance theory is the case of the ghost rails. We touched on the rails found near the Palace Hotel, but as the excavations expanded toward the Embarcadero, more of these metal tracks appeared. These weren't standard railroad wedge tracks. They were narrow, T-shaped rails made of a non-oxidizing alloy embedded directly into the floor of tunnels that were supposedly built for drainage. Why would a sewer need a rail system? And more importantly, why were these rails found in layers of sediment that were dated, even by 1906 standards, to a period long before the invention of the steam engine? The official story of San Francisco says the city was a sleepy, foggy outpost until 1848. It says the population went from a few hundred to tens of thousands in a matter of months. We are told these pioneers built the city from scratch using whatever materials they had. But if that's true, how do we explain the miles of precision transit tunnels that were already underfoot when they arrived? There is a theory, whispered in the fringes of architectural history, that San Francisco wasn't founded in 1848, it was reoccupied. This theory suggests that a previous civilization, one with a mastery of masonry and atmospheric electricity, had built a global network of star cities. San Francisco, with its strategic harbor and specific ley line alignment, was one of these nodes. But something happened, a great reset, a catastrophe, perhaps the very mudflood that filled the tunnels, wiped the slate clean. The people who arrived in 1849 weren't pioneers, they were scavengers. They found a city of stone and brick, partially buried in silt, and they simply dug out the top floors, added wooden Victorian facades, and claimed they had built it all. The 1906 earthquake was a disaster for the scavenger civilization because it revealed the master civilization beneath. As the year 1907 drew to a close, the windows of opportunity were slammed shut. The final reports from the reconstruction committees began to use a new kind of language. They stopped using words like uncovered or found. They started using words like constructed and engineered. They rewrote the history of the tunnels in real time. They took the survey photos that showed the ancient, perfect brickwork, and they labeled them as New Sewer Construction, 1907. They took the photos of the giant circular shafts and labeled them as emergency water cisterns. They took the impossible rails and had them melted down for reconstruction scrap. By 1910, the old San Francisco was gone. Not because it had been destroyed by the fire, but because it had been successfully hidden beneath a layer of fresh concrete in a new simplified history. But fragments remain. Today, if you know where to look, you can still see the edges of this hidden world. In certain sub-basements of the Tenderloin, or behind the locked doors of the municipal utility, vaults near Nob Hill, the old brick is still visible. It doesn't look like the bricks from the 1800s. It looks like it was made by a civilization that viewed infrastructure as art. You can feel the alignment when you walk down Market Street. You are walking on a trajectory that was decided centuries before the first cable car. You are walking on the roof of a buried world. The 1906 San Francisco mudflood tunnels aren't just a conspiracy theory. They are a physical contradiction. They are the infrastructure we weren't meant to see because they prove that our history is not a straight line of progress. It is a cycle. It is a story of discovery, occupation, and eventual erasure. We like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of human achievement, the builders of the modern world. But red bricks beneath San Francisco suggest a different truth. They suggest that we are living in the ruins of a giant. We are the tenants of a masterpiece we no longer have the blueprints for. And as the earth continues to shift along the San Andreas Fault, one has to wonder, how much longer can the great ceiling hold? The mud is still there. The tunnels are still there. The alignment is still perfect. The earthquake of 1906 gave us a glimpse into a version of history that was never supposed to surface. It showed us that beneath the wood and the paint of our modern cities lies a foundation of stone and secrets. And if San Francisco is built on a lie, what about the city you're standing in right now? What lies beneath your streets? What tunnels are waiting for the next great shake to reveal the truth? Because the earth doesn't care about our narratives. The earth remembers, and eventually the ground always gives up its secrets, one brick at a time. The 1906 excavation wasn't just earthquake cleanup. It was a glimpse, a brief accidental glimpse, into a version of history we were never meant to see. Thanks for watching. And if you found this interesting, well, there are a lot more cities with stories like this. Maybe I'll see you in the next one. Imagine a world where our greatest achievements are merely our ancestors' foundations. The data doesn't lie. The depths of these tunnels match cities across the Atlantic, across the world. We are scratching the surface. We are peeling back the paint of a masterpiece we forgot we owned. Historians will tell you the 1800s were a time of rapid growth. The brickwork tells you it was a time of discovery. Look at the bricks. Look at the joints. Look at the impossible precision of a people without electricity. If they didn't have the tools we have now, how did they build what we struggle to repair? There are places in San Francisco where the air feels heavier, where the past is pushing through. The electromagnetic readings in these sectors spike where the old rails once ran. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, but we've forgotten how to see the giants. Ask the workers. Ask the ones who spend their lives in the utility vaults and the sublevels. They will tell you about the doors that lead nowhere, the walls that vibrate when there's no wind. The city is a living machine. We just don't have the user manual anymore. The 1906 quake didn't just break the city, it opened it. It was a failure of the mask. Reports of underground thunder were documented for weeks after the fire was extinguished. They were trying to seal the noise. They were trying to drown the echoes of a lost world. But you can't seal the truth forever. It's written in the stone. It's etched in the brick. One day the ground will move again, and the great ceiling will fail. When the mask falls for good, what will we find? A tomb or an engine? San Francisco is just the beginning. The tunnels are everywhere. The history is everywhere. The maps are being redrawn, the questions are being asked, and the answers are coming. Keep digging, keep looking. The truth is right beneath your feet. And perhaps next time you walk these streets, you'll feel the weight of what's waiting. A brick doesn't forget. A city doesn't die. It just waits to be uncovered. We are not the first, and we will not be the last. This is the story of the inherited city. See you in the next mystery. Until then, watch the ground.